It was a bright, sunny morning when Aaron walked into the clinic. The waiting room was quiet, except for the soft hum of a nearby vending machine. Aaron took a deep breath and approached the reception desk. "Good morning. I'm here for a kidney donation test," Aaron said to the nurse behind the desk. "Ah, yes, Mr. Thompson. We've been expecting you," the nurse replied with a smile. She handed him some forms. "Please fill these out and take a seat. I'll call you shortly." Aaron found a spot in the corner of the room and began to fill out the paperwork. His mind was racing. These past few weeks had been so hectic. His younger brother, Michael, needed a kidney transplant urgently, and the whole family had been scrambling to get tested. Friends, too, were offering their help. As the eldest brother, everyone thought Aaron would be the first to get tested, but his job had kept him incredibly busy. Finally, he managed to find time, and here he was, hoping he could be a match. "Mr. Thompson," the nurse called out. Aaron looked up and nodded. He followed her down a long, sterile hallway to a small room where everything was set up for his test. "Please, sit here," the nurse said, pointing to a chair next to a small medical table. "The doctor will be here soon. Are you feeling okay?" "Yes, just a bit nervous," Aaron admitted, sitting down. "That's perfectly normal," the nurse assured him, prepping his arm for a blood draw. "The results will take a few days, and we'll contact you as soon as we have them." As the nurse inserted the needle, Aaron tried to relax. He thought about Michael, how he had always been there for him, and now it was his turn to be there for Michael. "I hope I'm a match," Aaron said, more to himself than to the nurse. "We hope so too, Mr. Thompson," the nurse replied, offering him a comforting smile. After the blood draw, Aaron left the clinic feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. He knew the waiting would be hard, but he also knew he had done everything he could for his brother. Now, all he could do was hope for the best. 1 week after the tests, Aaron received the call he had been anxiously waiting for. His chances of being a compatible kidney donor for his brother were more than 50%. Overwhelmed with relief, he immediately shared the news with his family. That evening, everyone gathered at Aaron and Kristen's home to celebrate the hopeful news. Grandpa Jack, with his ever-present smile, was the first to arrive, followed by Aaron's wife, Kristen, and their 2 children, Paul and Scarlett. The living room was filled with chatter and laughter as they discussed what the next steps would be. Plans were made, questions were asked, and there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. Yet amidst the celebration, Aaron noticed that Paul and Scarlett seemed distant. "Isn't this great news?" Aaron asked, trying to gauge their feelings as he sat down next to them on the couch. "Yeah, it's good," Paul muttered, not meeting his father's eyes. Scarlett just nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Aaron exchanged a concerned look with Kristen, who gently encouraged the kids. "What's on your minds, kids? You both seem a little off today." Paul looked at Scarlett. They didn't know if they should break the news then and there. Paul shook his head, signalling to call it off for now, and Scarlett had to make something up. "It's just, we're worried about you, Dad," Scarlett finally said, her voice low and serious. "And the surgery," Paul chimed in quickly. "We learned about it in school, how serious it can be." Aaron moved closer, wrapping an arm around each of them. "I understand why you're worried," he said softly, "but the doctors are very good, and they'll take the best care of me. I promise." Aaron knelt in front of them, taking their hands in his. "I'll be in good hands, I promise. And I'm doing this for Uncle Michael. He needs our help." "We know," Paul said, finally looking up. "We just don't want anything to happen to you." Aaron hugged them both tightly. "Nothing will happen. I'll be here with you all, just like always." The evening continued with more reassurances, and slowly Paul and Scarlett began to participate more in the conversations. That night, they couldn't bring themselves to say what they wanted to say. Scarlett had always been proactive and thoughtful, especially when it came to family matters. When Uncle Michael's illness became serious, she didn't hesitate to step up. Being a freshman in college, she understood the strain medical expenses could put on a family. So when she found a clinic that offered a significant discount for group testing, she saw it as a win-win situation. She signed herself and her brother Paul up without a second thought. The clinic visit was straightforward, but the results were disappointing. Neither Scarlett nor Paul were close matches as donors for their uncle. However, it wasn't just the kidney match testing that would come back with surprising results. A few days after Aaron received his promising news, Scarlett got a call from the clinic. They asked her to come in, but didn't specify why. Curious and a bit anxious, she drove to the clinic the next morning. Upon her arrival, she was quickly ushered into a small consultation room. A specialist greeted her with a warm yet somewhat solemn smile. "Thank you for coming in, Scarlett," the specialist began. "When you signed up for the family discount, the package included not only the medical tests but also an ancestry test as a bonus." Scarlett nodded, her interest piqued. "Oh, that's interesting," she responded, genuinely intrigued by the unexpected addition. The doctor handed her an envelope. "Here are the results. You might find them quite enlightening." Taking the envelope, Scarlett smiled politely, not yet sensing the gravity of the situation. She left the clinic with the envelope tucked in her bag, planning to look at it later when she had a quiet moment at home. That evening, after dinner, Scarlett finally opened the envelope. The papers inside detailed her genetic ancestry, which was interesting enough, but it was another, more shocking piece of information that turned her world upside down. The results clearly stated that genetically, Aaron could not be her biological father. Panic set in as the implications of this discovery overwhelmed her. Confused and desperate for some form of explanation or support, she called her brother Paul. "We need to talk. It's important," she said urgently when he picked up the phone. They met at a quiet cafe, where Scarlett handed Paul the documents, her hands shaking. As Paul read through them, his brow furrowed in confusion and concern. Do you think we were adopted?" he finally said, voicing the dread that had instantly formed in both their minds. Scarlett shrugged, her mind racing with numerous possibilities. "I don't know, Paul, but this says Dad isn't my biological father. What are we supposed to think?" The siblings sat in silence for a few moments, each lost in their thoughts. The drive home after their initial discovery was tense, filled with silent dread and shared apprehension. Scarlett and Paul had countless questions, but no answers yet. However, before confronting their parents, Scarlett insisted on one more test to confirm the initial results. They could hardly believe what they were facing, and a part of them hoped it was all a mistake. A week later, the results of the second test arrived. Sitting together at the kitchen table, with the unopened envelope between them, the air was thick with anxiety. Paul reached out, took the envelope, and slowly tore it open. They both held their breath as he unfolded the papers and began to read. The silence that followed was heavy. Paul looked up from the paper, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Scarlett," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's confirmed. And there's more." "What is it?" Scarlett asked, her heart racing. "Neither of us are Dad's biological children," Paul said, struggling to get the words out. "And Scarlett, it says here we have different fathers." The room seemed to spin around her as Scarlett absorbed the shock. Tears welled up in her eyes and she leaned into Paul, who wrapped his arms around her. She cried, not just from the shock or the betrayal she felt, but from a deep, aching sense of compassion for the man they both called Dad. "Why? How could this have happened?" she sobbed. "I don't know, Scarlett," Paul murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. "But remember what we've always said. We're a family, no matter what. We've lived a happy life together. That hasn't changed. But Dad, Scarlett managed to say between sobs, he raised us, loved us, and he did everything for us. How will we face him now? We will face him together, Paul replied firmly. He's our dad, Scarlett. No test can change that. They sat together for a long time, finding comfort in each other's presence. Finally, gathering their courage, they decided it was time to confront their parents. They needed answers, and they couldn't put off the conversation any longer. When they arrived at their parents' house, the evening air felt heavier than usual. Aaron greeted them at the door with a smile, but it faltered when he saw their serious expressions. "What's wrong?" Aaron asked, her voice laced with concern. "We need to talk, Dad," Paul said. "Where's Mom?" "Mom went out to get groceries." "What's going on, guys?" Aaron asked again. When he saw his children's expressions, Aaron's face paled, an unspoken understanding passing through his eyes. He feared it had to be with the kidney donation test. He nodded slowly, leading them into the living room. Scarlett and Paul exchanged a glance, then Paul took a deep breath. "Dad, we found out something from the tests. It's about our family." Scarlett took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she reached for her father's. Aaron, seeing the tears in his daughter's eyes, felt a rush of concern. "What's wrong, Scarlett?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "I love you so much, Dad," Scarlett said, her voice choked with emotion. She leaned in and hugged him tightly, a gesture full of love and desperation. Nothing changes that. As they pulled apart, Aaron looked into her eyes, searching for an explanation for the sudden display of intense emotions. "What's going on, Scarlett?" She hesitated, her heart pounding. "We need to tell you something," she said softly, her eyes pleading with him to stay calm. "Please don't freak out." Aaron's face was a mix of confusion and concern. "You can tell me anything," he assured her, though his voice betrayed his growing anxiety. Scarlett took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Dad, we found out. We're not really your biological children," she finally confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron's face froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment he said nothing. Then he managed a weak smile. "Is this some kind of prank?" he asked, half hoping they would burst out laughing and tell him it was just a joke. Scarlett shook her head, her eyes earnest and sad. "No, Dad, it's not a prank," she said quietly. Paul, who had been quietly supporting his sister, reached into his bag and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Aaron but kept glancing towards the hallway. He and Scarlett had agreed that their father should hear this first and decide how to proceed. Aaron took the envelope with a shaky hand and slowly opened it. Inside, he found the documents with the test results, his eyes scanning the words but not fully comprehending them at first. His heart sank as the reality of the situation dawned on him. How did this happen?" Aaron finally asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "We don't know all the details," Paul spoke up. "We think Mum can explain more. We wanted to tell you first." Aaron sat back, his mind racing as he tried to process the information. When Kristen arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. She looked at Aaron, Scarlett, and Paul, confusion written across her face. Aaron held the envelope in one hand, his other hand clenched into a fist at his side. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking voice. "Kristen," Aaron began, his voice strained, "there's something we need to discuss. Something important." Kristen dropped her bag on the floor and made a few tentative steps, a sense of dread filling her as she noticed the serious expressions on their faces. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. Aaron hesitated, his anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. "I knew it!" he suddenly yelled, the words bursting out of him. "Son of a bitch! I knew that bastard was messing with you." Kristen recoiled, shock and fear overtaking her. "Aaron, what are you talking about?" Aaron paced back and forth, his emotions getting the better of him. "We had that big fight, remember? The year you were away for those 2 weeks, I always suspected something happened then." Scarlett interrupted, her voice urgent. "Dad, there's more." She paused, gathering her courage. "Both Paul and I, we're from different fathers." The revelation hit Aaron like a physical blow. He stopped pacing, his breaths becoming laboured as he processed the new information. His gaze drifted away, staring into the distance, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that was too complex to understand. Kristen moved towards him, her own tears starting to form. "Aaron, please let me explain. It's not what you think." Aaron turned to face her, his expression one of utter betrayal mixed with a plea for the truth. "How could this happen, Kristen? How could you keep this from me all these years?" Kristen reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. Gathering her resolve, she spoke, her voice trembling. "It was the hardest time of our marriage. After our fight, I was alone, and yes, I made mistakes, but it was a confusing time for me, and I never intended to hurt you." Aaron shook his head, struggling to accept her words. "And the children? Were they just mistakes too?" "No, never," Kristen exclaimed, her voice firm despite her tears. "I love you, Aaron. You're the only father they've ever known, and the only one they need. I was going to tell you many times, but I couldn't find the courage. I was scared of losing you, of losing our family." Aaron looked from Paul to Scarlett and back to Kristen. His family, his world, seemed both shattered and whole at the same time. He took a deep breath, the anger slowly draining from him, replaced by a profound sadness. "I need some time," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I need to think about all this." As Aaron walked away to find some space to clear his head, Kristen turned to Scarlett and Paul, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted any of you to suffer because of my actions." The kids were quiet. They didn't say anything back. The room settled into a heavy silence, each person lost in their thoughts. An hour later, Aaron emerged from the bedroom with a suitcase in hand. He said he was going to stay in the hotel for the time being. "Dad," Paul said softly, his voice a mix of understanding and pain. "We're still your kids, right? Nothing changes that, okay?" He looked at his children, his expression one of heartache mixed with love. "No matter what these papers say, you are my children," he said firmly. "You will always be my children." Scarlett and Paul nodded, tears in their eyes, touched by their father's unwavering support. "We feel the same, Dad," Scarlett said. "You're our dad, no matter what." There was a long, heavy silence as they all stood there together, each lost in their thoughts. Then Aaron walked out. Aaron sat alone in the dimly lit hotel room, the only sounds the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant murmur of traffic. The curtains were drawn, casting shadows across the notebook in which he scribbled his thoughts. Each word was a struggle, a small battle to make sense of the chaos that now defined his life. He and Kristen had built everything together, from a fledgling business to a family. Their life had been a tapestry of shared dreams and mutual challenges, woven tightly over more than 2 decades of marriage. Now, that tapestry seemed unravelled, the threads of trust and intimacy frayed by secrets and revelations. Aaron paused, setting down his pen. His mind replayed their beginnings, the early days filled with ambition and mutual respect. They had been unstoppable, both at work and in love. But he remembered clearly the pivotal moment of their first major disagreement, a time when their business and personal lives had collided messily. Kristen had left him then, only to return weeks later with promises of compromise and renewed commitment. It was during that reconciliation that Kristen had become pregnant with Scarlett. His phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, Kristen's name flashing on the screen. She had been calling non-stop, her messages a mixture of apologies and pleas for a chance to explain further. Aaron felt torn between his love for her and his sense of betrayal. He picked up the phone, reading one of her recent messages. "I was scared and confused back then, Aaron. I never stopped loving you. Please, let's talk. We can get through this, like we always have." Aaron sighed, the weight of her words heavy on his heart. He knew Kristen was remorseful. Her confession about the drunken mistake had been hard to hear, but what troubled him more was the timeline. How could Paul also not be his, born 2 years after Scarlett? As he pondered, he realized that the uncertainty of those times might have led Kristen to further indiscretions, ones she hadn't yet confessed to. The thought pained him deeply. Yet, through the haze of his turmoil, one thing remained crystal clear: his children. No matter the biological truth, he loved Scarlett and Paul unconditionally. He could not turn his back on them, nor could he fully turn his back on a life that had brought him much joy despite its imperfections. Finally, Aaron picked up his phone and dialed Kristen's number. She answered almost immediately, her voice anxious. "Kristen, I'm listening," Aaron said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about everything, the whole truth. But understand this. I'm here for our children, no matter what. We need to figure out how we can move forward together, not just as a couple, but as a family." Kristen's relief was palpable through the phone. "Thank you, Aaron. I'm so sorry. Yes, let's meet. I want to fix this, for us and for our family." They agreed to meet the next morning at their home, to lay everything out on the table, to confront the past and navigate a path forward. Aaron knew it wouldn't be easy, and the road to reconciliation would be fraught with challenges. But he also knew that forgiveness, though complex, was not out of reach. When Aaron pulled into the driveway of their home, his heart was heavy with a mix of dread and a desperate hope for some semblance of closure. The house looked the same as it always had, but to Aaron, it felt different, like a place that held secrets too heavy to bear. Kristen was waiting for him. As he entered, the aroma of his favourite dishes filled the air, a clear attempt by Kristen to create a comforting environment for their difficult conversation. Despite the inviting smell, Aaron's stomach churned. He had barely eaten in days, and today was no different. "Hi," Kristen greeted him softly, her eyes searching his for signs of how this might go. Aaron nodded, unable to muster a smile. "Hi." They sat down at the dining table, the food laid out between them largely untouched as Kristen began to speak. She recounted the night of their big fight years ago, her voice trembling. "I was hurt, and I got drunk. I ended up with a stranger from the bar," she confessed, not meeting his eyes. Aaron listened in silence, his face stoic, the pain evident in his eyes. When she mentioned a second incident, his heart sank further. "Why then?" Aaron asked, his voice low and controlled. Kristen hesitated, then admitted, "I thought you were cheating on me. It was a terrible mistake." Aaron shook his head, the disappointment etched deeply across his face. "And you never thought to mention any of this before? Never thought to consider the children might not be mine?" Kristen's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared," she whispered. I hoped it would never come out. I was selfish." The revelation stung, and Aaron felt a wave of anger at her recklessness, not just for the infidelity, but for the potential health risks to him. "You didn't think about the risks you were taking, not just for our relationship, but for my health, our health." "I know," Kristen said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Aaron. I've been a fool, and I've hurt you beyond what I can ever fix. The weight of their years together, the lies, and the betrayals hung heavily in the room. Aaron looked at Kristen, a woman he had loved and trusted for over 2 decades, and felt a profound sense of loss. "Kristen, I can't do this anymore," Aaron finally said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I can't be with someone I don't trust, not after everything that's happened." Kristen sobbed, her body shaking. "Please, Aaron, isn't there a way to—" "I need to be honest with myself," Aaron interrupted, his decision clear despite the pain it caused both of them. "I will always be there for Paul and Scarlett. I love them. They are my children in all the ways that matter. But as for us, I think it's best if we go our separate ways." The finality in his voice marked the end of their conversation and, seemingly, their marriage. They spent the next hour discussing practical matters, living arrangements, the business, how they would explain this to the children. As Aaron left the table, he felt an immense grief for the loss of what they had built together, but also a bitter relief at confronting the truth. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in days he felt a glimmer of hope about starting anew, on his own terms, with honesty and integrity at the forefront. The day after Aaron and Kristen decided to go their separate ways, Aaron knew he had one more difficult conversation ahead of him, talking to Scarlett and Paul. He chose a quiet, cozy restaurant, hoping the familiar and calm setting would help ease the tension of the discussion. As he waited for his children to arrive, Aaron rehearsed in his mind what he wanted to say. His heart ached at the thought of any pain this might cause them, but he was determined to reassure them of his unwavering love and support. Scarlett and Paul arrived together, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. They greeted their father with tentative smiles and took their seats across from him at the table. The waiter came by and took their orders, and then there was a brief, uncomfortable silence. "Dad, are you okay?" Scarlett finally broke the silence, her voice filled with concern. Aaron took a deep breath and nodded. "I've been better, but I'll be okay. I wanted to talk to both of you about what's happening." Paul leaned in, listening intently. "We're here for you, Dad. Just tell us what's going on." Aaron smiled gratefully at them. "First, I want you both to know that my love for you is unconditional. It doesn't change, no matter what happens between me and your mum. You are my children, and I love you more than life itself." Scarlett reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We love you too, Dad." Aaron continued, "Your mum and I have decided to divorce. It's not an easy decision, but it's the best one under the circumstances. I want you both to know that this has nothing to do with either of you. You are not responsible, and there's nothing you could have done differently." Paul nodded, processing the information. "What are you going to do now?" Aaron sighed, a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. "I'm going to take some time off work. I need to heal, to think about my life and where I want to go from here. It's a time for me to figure out how to be the best father and person I can be." "That sounds like a good idea," Paul said, supporting his father's decision. Scarlett added, "We're here for you, Dad. If you need anything, just let us know. We can spend more time together, just hang out, talk, whatever you need." Aaron was moved by their support and love. "Thank you, both of you. That means everything to me." Dinner arrived, and they continued to talk about lighter topics. It was a bittersweet meal, filled with moments of laughter and pauses laden with unspoken emotions. The evening had grown cooler as Aaron, Scarlett, and Paul stepped outside the restaurant. The street was quiet, the soft glow of street lamps casting gentle shadows on their faces. They lingered for a moment, none of them eager to say goodbye just yet. It was Scarlett who broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "Dad, before we go, there's something Paul and I want to say," she began, exchanging a look with her brother. Paul nodded, taking a deep breath. "We've been talking, and we want you to know something important." Aaron looked at his children, a sense of curiosity mingled with apprehension. "What is it?" Scarlett took her father's hand, her eyes earnest. "If someday you want to start another family or meet someone new, it's totally okay with us. We just want you to be happy, Dad. Whatever that looks like for you." The words took Aaron by surprise, his heart swelling with a mix of pain and gratitude. Tears welled up in his eyes as he processed what his children had just told him. The thought of starting another family had been far from his mind, his heart still entangled in the threads of his past with Kristen. Yet hearing his children's blessing for his future happiness was unexpectedly freeing. "Thank you," Aaron managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Hearing that from you both, it means a lot. I don't know what the future holds, but knowing I have your support, that you both want me to be happy, it's more than I could have asked for." Paul stepped forward and hugged his father. "We mean it, Dad. We'll always be here, and we'll always be family. No matter what changes, that's one thing you can count on." As they slowly pulled apart, Aaron wiped the tears from his cheeks, smiling through the emotion. "I love you both, more than I can ever express. Thank you for being so understanding, for being so incredible." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans to meet again soon. As they finally said their goodbyes, Aaron watched his children walk away, a profound sense of pride and love filling him. They were truly the best parts of his life, and no matter what the future held, he knew that the bond they shared would remain unbreakable. Driving to his now rented apartment, Aaron felt a sense of peace settle over him. The conversation with Scarlett and Paul had opened a door to new possibilities, to a future where he could find happiness again, perhaps in ways he hadn't yet imagined. The road ahead was uncertain, and while the thought of moving on was daunting, he felt fortified by the unconditional love and support of his children. As the city lights blurred past, Aaron realized that this ending was not just an end, but also a beginning, a chance to heal, to grow, and to embrace whatever came next with an open heart. Scarlett had always been tenacious, a trait that served her well in law school and in her quest to uncover the truths of her own life. Over dinner, a usually silent affair these days with her family, she finally decided to voice the thoughts that had been haunting her. "Mum, I've been doing something," Scarlett began, her voice cutting through the silence sharply. Kristen looked up, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What is it, Scarlett?" Kristen asked, her voice cautious. "I've been searching for my biological father," Scarlett revealed, her determination evident in her tone. "Not because I need a new dad, I already have one, but because I think he deserves to know the truth." The conversation that followed was tense. Kristen, caught off guard, initially resisted, but Scarlett's resolve and her reasons gradually wore down her defences. Eventually, Kristen provided what little information she had. Armed with this information, Scarlett embarked on a challenging search. She learned through her inquiries that Paul's father had tragically passed away in a car accident, a piece of news that brought a solemn closure on one front. However, Scarlett pushed on with her search for her own biological father. After 6 months of dead ends, perseverance, and the kind of investigative work that paralleled her legal studies, Scarlett finally found him. Rick Madison, a seasoned lawyer, was taken aback when Scarlett contacted him. He was completely unaware of her existence. They agreed to meet in a quiet coffee shop, a neutral place filled with the soft murmur of other customers and the clink of coffee cups. Scarlett felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness as she waited. When Rick finally walked in, there was a moment of mutual assessment, a silent acknowledgement of their connection before they even spoke. "Scarlett?" Rick asked, extending his hand, his voice betraying a hint of his surprise. "Yes, Mr. Madison. Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Scarlett replied, shaking his hand firmly. As they sat down, Scarlett took a deep breath before diving into their story. She recounted everything from Kristen's confessions to the recent upheavals in their family life. Rick listened intently, his expression one of shock, gradually morphing into concern. When she finished, Rick leaned back, processing the heavy load of information. "I had no idea," he finally said, his voice soft but serious. "She never contacted me after we dated shortly, and she never told me anything. I would have wanted to know." Scarlett nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. "I thought you should know. I don't expect anything from you. I just thought it was fair." Rick paused, then looked directly at her. "Scarlett, there's more to this than you might know. Kristen and it wasn't just a random hookup. I didn't know your mother was engaged to your father at the time. If I had known, I guess you wouldn't be here. Your mother and I were close, for a short time. And at some point, she just vanished. I tried contacting her, but she said she didn't want to have anything to do with me. That was it." Scarlett absorbed his words, a new layer of complexity added to the already convoluted history of her family. "I appreciate you being honest with me," she said quietly. "It means a lot." As Scarlett and Rick continued their conversation in the quiet coffee shop, the topic shifted naturally between personal history and current realities. Despite the unexpected connection between them, Scarlett felt a need to set the boundaries of their relationship. "I appreciate getting to know you, and while you're my biological father, I don't really feel a strong connection," Scarlett admitted candidly, her voice steady but gentle. "I hope you understand." Rick nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "I do understand, Scarlett. These are complex emotions, and they don't form or fade overnight. Just knowing about you is a big change for me." The conversation then turned to Aaron. Rick, curious about the man who had raised Scarlett, asked about her relationship with him. Scarlett's face lit up as she spoke of Aaron, her words filled with affection and respect. "He has been an amazing father. He's kind, strong, and supportive. I often wish I had never discovered the truth. Not that it changed anything for me. But still," she shared, her tone tinged with sadness, but also deep gratitude. Rick listened intently, visibly moved by how highly Scarlett spoke of Aaron. It was clear that Aaron's role in her life was profound and cherished. Though the revelation of her biological lineage had been shocking, it was evident that the emotional bonds she shared with Aaron were unbreakable. "It's beautiful to hear you speak so fondly of him," Rick responded after a moment, his voice warm. "It really shows the strength of the relationship you two have built. It doesn't hurt me to know this. In fact, it's comforting to know you were raised by someone who clearly loves you deeply." They also discussed their shared profession, which added an unexpected layer to their meeting. Scarlett explained how Aaron had encouraged her to pursue law, recognizing her sharp mind and determination. "That's quite a coincidence, us both being in the law field," Rick remarked with a smile. "It seems you were destined for it." As their meeting drew to a close, Rick stood up, his demeanor reflecting a mix of emotions: regret for the years missed, respect for the life Scarlett had built, and hope for some form of continued connection. "Scarlett, I want you to know that I'm here for you whenever you wish," he said sincerely. "Whether it's about law, life, or just to talk. I'll respect whatever relationship you wish to have with me." Scarlett nodded, feeling a sense of peace as they parted ways. "Thank you, Rick. That means a lot to me. I'll definitely keep that in mind." They said their goodbyes, and as Scarlett walked away, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced the unknown and found not only answers but also a new perspective on her family and her past. 3 months after her initial meeting with Rick, Scarlett received a phone call from Aaron. His voice was light and cheerful, a tone she hadn't heard in a while, which piqued her curiosity. "Hey, Scarlett, how about you and Paul come over for dinner this Friday? I've got a surprise for you both," Aaron suggested with a hint of excitement in his voice. Scarlett agreed, intrigued by her father's mysterious invitation. On the day of the dinner, she and Paul drove to Aaron's house, discussing what the possible surprise could be. As they approached the door, laughter spilled out into the cool evening air. Opening the door, they were greeted by a sight neither of them had expected. There was Aaron, deep in conversation and laughter with Rick. The two men looked up and welcomed Scarlett and Paul with broad smiles. Come in, Aaron beckoned them inside enthusiastically. Scarlett and Paul exchanged surprised glances before joining the two men in the living room. Scarlett's eyes flickered between Aaron and Rick, her curiosity growing. "Rick reached out to me a while back," Aaron began to explain, noticing Scarlett's puzzled look. "He wanted to meet the man who raised you and Paul. And well, we hit it off right from the start." Rick nodded, his expression affirming Aaron's words. "I had to see for myself the kind of man who did such an admirable job raising my biological daughter. Aaron here is quite the character," he said with a chuckle. The evening progressed with ease, the conversation flowing as if they were old friends reconnecting, rather than two fathers sharing such a complex history. Scarlett and Paul listened, fascinated by the camaraderie that had developed between Aaron and Rick. As they sat down to dinner, Aaron shared more about their newfound friendship. "You know, Rick and I have discovered that we have a lot in common aside from our impeccable taste in someone," he joked, earning a round of laughter. "And, as it turns out, Rick is also single, and we've been thinking about hitting the town together, exploring what the singles scene has to offer for gentlemen of our vintage," Aaron added, winking. Rick raised his glass in agreement. "Here's to new adventures and new chapters," he toasted. The mood was light and joyful, and Scarlett felt a warmth in her heart seeing Aaron so happy and vibrant again. The dinner conversation turned to future plans, with Aaron and Rick sharing their ideas for travel and perhaps even a joint venture in some new business ideas. As the evening wound down, Scarlett and Paul helped clear the table, both of them more at ease with the situation than they could have imagined just months before. Driving home later that night, Scarlett reflected on the changes the past year had brought, the revelations, the pain of new truths, and the unexpected turns in relationships had all woven together to create a new, if unconventional, family tapestry. She realized that life, much like law, wasn't about absolutes, but about finding a way to balance the complexities and contradictions to create something fair and right. The evening had not only reaffirmed her love for Aaron, but also opened her heart a little more to Rick, appreciating his effort to connect and build something positive out of the complicated circumstances. Scarlett smiled to herself, feeling grateful for the resilience of love, the unexpected friendships, and the new beginnings that life offered. As the city lights passed by her window, she felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that her family, however unconventional, was with her every